We have a really fundamental problem with, I'll use an economist's term, vertical fiscal imbalance. Sounds really dry, but the concept's easy enough to understand. There's a gap between the revenue that we can raise and the things that we're responsible for. So councils across Australia raise 4% of all taxation revenue of all descriptions. And yet we are responsible for a third, 33%, of all of the stuff: roads, pools, library, halls, social services of one sort or another, planning functions and so forth. So we don't get enough money, which means that as a sector, we are always dependent on handouts from other tiers of government, which always happens very grudgingly and very arbitrarily and without any consistency or security about the source of funding. The federal government gives us a sum of money, and it could fall into one of a number of buckets. It could be tied funding, which means we can only spend it for a particular purpose, like roads.
Yep.
So there's the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Grant Program. That's a federal program. Or the Black Spots program that helps us, you know, rehabilitate roads so that they're safer. That's a federal program. Then there's untied funding that we get to choose what we spend it on, and they're called federal assistance grants. Here's the killer statistic for your listeners. In 1996, when John Howard was first elected, federal assistance grants to local government formed 1% of all federal taxation revenue. So of all the tax that the feds collected, they gave 1% to local government.
So every dollar, 1 cent.
Yeah. And yet, we're responsible for a third of everything that goes on in Australia.
Yeah.
We're responsible for 75% of Australia's roads. That's a network of 650,000 kilometres worth of roads, and we've got 1 cent in the dollar. Now, fast forward, 30 years, we get half a cent in the dollar. It's fallen by half. And even if you add back in those special buckets, black spots, local roads, community infrastructure and so forth, the aggregate is still well short of where we used to be years ago. And yet the federal government, squirts perfume on a piece of poo and says, look at all this money that we're giving you. And we're saying, no, there's a structural deficit here that's been sliding for years and years and years, which means that councils don't have enough money to do what they do. Our ability to raise our own revenue through rating is held under the rate peg, which means that our costs start to accelerate ahead of the rate peg. And then once a decade or so, we have to go cap in hand back to the state government, back to 𝗏𝗏, and put an application in for a special rate variation to jack up our rates by maybe a third. I mean, last time we did this in 2017, we had to jack up rates by a third. I voted against it at that time, but I'm now aware of how the whole sector is set up to fail. So we put in an application for an SRV, and the community, who are suffering cost of living pressures, are out there with flaming brands and pitchforks saying, well, you're not doing a terribly good job with the money we're already giving you. Why should we give you any more? And I'm rather sympathetic to that argument too. But people expect their roads and libraries and pools to be maintained to a certain standard. And at the moment, council's going out backwards. We're flush with money that are the overhang of grants that came for bushfire and flood recovery and build back. Once that money evaporates, and all of that money is going to more or less finish evaporating over the next 12 to 18 months, our true budgetary position will be exposed, and it's dire. That it's a symptom of a deeper cause, because when the budget's in deficit, an elected chamber it's a core part of their responsibility. They have to ask questions about, well, what do we cut? Nobody wants to cut anything. So the Lower Portland Ferry was an enormous expense to council.
Yep.
Thankfully, that was taken off our hands, and the state government was one of those rare occasions where the state government saw sense and said, yeah, it's a bit of an anomaly, isn't it? Roads and Maritime run every ferry in New South Wales except this one, which is the joint responsibility of Hawkesbury and Hills Council. You know what? We will take that off your hands. That was a blessing.
Yeah.
In the sense that the ferry keeps on running and we weren't forced into a difficult decision to cancel it. But then, if the budget's in deficit and you're holding public events through the year, there's Australia Day, there's '𝗵𝗏𝗡𝗏, there's Hawkesbury Fest, there's Christmas lights. Light up Windsor. What do you do? And that whole debate about, well, we can't afford to do this every year. Maybe we do it every second year. And then there were people who were prepared to cut Australia Day, and I was one of those people who put my foot down really firmly and said, no, if we're going to cut something, we're not cutting Australia Day. That's a red line.
And I appreciate that. Like,
Yeah.